Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and moral corruption. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Good morning all, and welcome to everyone's favorite day of the year. That's right, it's day one of Daylight Savings Time. And when I sometimes say that these episodes are freshly recorded, well today, to borrow a phrase from my friend Derek Hayes, host of Monsters Among Us, today's episode is truly nearly live because it is 10:15 a.m. on Sunday morning, that's Pacific time, and this will drop at 5 p.m., and I am just now recording it. Speaking of Derek and Monsters Among Us, they are currently raising money to help pay for the private snowplows that are needed to dig trapped neighbors, some of whom are elderly and disabled, out of snowdrifts in Lake Arrowhead, California. And some of those people have been trapped in their homes for up to 2 weeks. It's really scary, especially with this new rainstorm, which is a Pineapple Express, meaning that it's a warm rain that came from the tropics. And that means that these historic snow dumps are going to be melting fast, and there's a real dangerous flood risk. If you're able and would like to help, check out Monsters Among Us podcast on Instagram to find out how, and I will put a link in the show notes as well. Speaking of show notes, that is where you'll always find my sources, and today's story came from a pair of articles written in 2018 and 2022 respectively for The Cut in New York Magazine, and written by Reeves Weiderman. So if you'd like to read those articles, check out the show notes for the links. I will tell you this is going to be a multi-part story, so if you're not a spoiler junkie, and you'd rather wait to find out what happens right here on Kinda Murdery, well then I suggest you wait to read them, but of course that is up to you. Now this is a recent and a pretty famous story. In fact, there is a Lifetime original movie based on it, fictionalized but based on it. There is also now a Netflix movie based on the true account of this story. I'll tell you what the story is in a minute, be patient. So, I won't be treading new ground here, but I gotta tell you, as soon as I encountered the story you're about to hear today, I had no choice but to tell it. You know, as you know because you listen, I tell a lot of dark, creepy, unsettling, upsetting stories. This is Kinda Murdery after all. But in general, discovering and then reading about a new story for the first time doesn't personally give me the heebie-jeebies. I generally don't get upset when I read stuff, at least not in a visceral, physical, pit of the stomach sort of way. Today's story is an exception to that. As I read it, I found myself feeling progressively more and more frightened. This is the story of a young family who bought their dream home in an upscale suburb of New Jersey, only to discover they had a mysterious, unexpected, undesired, and absolutely sinister neighbor. And now, I suggest that you put your personal items underneath the seat in front of you. Stow your carry-on in the overhead compartment. Let go of the worries of the day, but be sure your seatbelt is fastened. There's turbulence expected ahead. Part 1 of Kinda Murdery's telling of The Watcher, 657 Boulevard, starts now. On a warm night in June of 2014, Derek Broadus had just finished an evening of painting at his new home in Westfield, New Jersey, when he went outside to check the mail. Derek and his wife Maria had closed on the 6-bedroom house at 657 Boulevard 3 days earlier, and were doing some renovations before they moved in, so there wasn't much in the mail except a few bills and a white, card-shaped envelope. It was addressed in thick, clunky handwriting to, quote, the new owner, unquote, and the typed note inside began warmly. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, it read. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. For the Broadduses, buying 657 Boulevard had fulfilled a dream. Maria was raised in Westfield, and the house was a few blocks from her childhood home. Derek grew up working class in Maine, and then moved his way up the ladder at the insurance company in Manhattan to become a senior vice president with a salary large enough to afford the $1.3 million house. The Broadduses had bought 657 Boulevard just after Derek celebrated his 40th birthday, and their 3 kids were already debating which of the house's fireplaces Santa Claus would use. But as Derek kept reading the letter from his new neighbor, it took a turn. How did you end up here? The writer asked. Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now. My grandfather watched this house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. The author's reconnaissance had apparently already begun. The letter identified the Broadduses' Honda minivan as well as the workers renovating the home. It read, quote, I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. Earlier in the week, Derek and Maria had gone to the house and chatted with their new neighbors while their children, who were 5, 8, and 10 years old, ran around the backyard with several kids from the neighborhood. The letter writer seemed to have noticed. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted, the anonymous correspondent wrote before asking if there were, quote, more on the way. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? The letter queried. Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family, or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me. The envelope had no return address. Who am I? The person wrote. There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. The letter concluded with the suggestion that this message would not be the last. Welcome, my friends, welcome, it said. Let the party begin, followed by a signature typed in a cursive font that read, The Watcher. Okay, pause just a moment. I gotta say that I got completely freaked out the first time I read this story, and now I'm reading it again, recording it for you guys, and I've got the heebie-jeebies all over again. I'm like glancing over my shoulder and holding my breath. It's absolutely bone-chilling. Let's get back to it. It was after 10 p.m., and Derek Broaddus was alone. He raced around the house, turning off lights so no one could see inside. Then he called the Westfield Police Department. An officer came to the house, read the letter, and said, What the fuck is this? He asked Derek if he had enemies and recommended moving a piece of construction equipment from the back porch in case the watcher tried to toss it through a window. Derek rushed back to his wife and kids who were living in their old home elsewhere in Westfield. That night, Derek and Maria wrote an email to John and Andrea Woods, the couple who sold them 657 Boulevard, to ask if they had any idea who the watcher might be or why he or she had written, quote, I asked the Woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened. Andrea Woods replied the next morning. A few days before moving out, the Woods had also received a letter from the watcher. The note had been odd, she said, and made similar mention of the watcher's family observing the house over time. But Andrea said she and her husband had never received anything like it in their 23 years in the house, and had thrown the letter away without much thought. That day, the Woodses went with Maria to the police station, where Detective Leonard Lugo told her not to tell anyone about the letters, including her new neighbors, most of whom she'd never met, and all of whom were now suspects. The Broadduses spent the coming weeks on high alert. Derek canceled a work trip, and whenever Maria took the kids to their new house, she would yell their names if they wandered into a corner of the yard. When Derek gave a tour of the renovation to a couple on the block, he froze when the wife said, It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood. The Broadus' general contractor arrived one morning to find that a heavy sign he'd hammered into the front yard had been ripped out overnight. 2 weeks after the letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check the mail. She recognized the thick black lettering on the card-shaped envelope and called the police. "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard," the watcher wrote. "The workers have been busy, and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what's in the walls yet? In time, they will." In this letter, the watcher had addressed Derek and Maria directly, misspelling their names as Mr. and Mrs. Braddus, Braddus, instead of Broaddus. Had the watcher been close enough to hear one of the Broadus' contractors addressing them? The watcher had boasted of having learned a lot about the family in the preceding weeks, especially about their children. The letter identified the Broadus' 3 kids by birth order and by their nicknames, the ones Maria had been yelling. "I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me," it said. "You certainly say their names often." The letter asked about one child in particular whom the writer had seen using an easel inside an enclosed porch. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the watcher who's been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on, and they kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job. It's my life, my obsession, and now you, too, are my obsession, Braddus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard, and now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. Derek and Maria stopped bringing their kids to the house. They were no longer sure when or if they would move in. Several weeks later, a 3rd letter arrived. "Where have you gone to?" the watcher wrote. 657 Boulevard is missing you. Many Westfield residents compare their town to Mayberry, the idyllic setting for the Andy Griffith Show. The kind of place where a new neighbor might greet you with a welcoming note. Westfield is 45 minutes from New York and a bit too slow for singles, meaning that the town's 30,000 residents are largely well-to-do families. In 2018, Bloomberg ranked Westfield the 99th richest city in America, but only the 18th wealthiest in New Jersey. And in 2014, when the watcher struck, the website Neighborhood Scout named it the country's 30th safest town. The most pressing local issues of late, according to residents, have been the temporary closure of a Trader Joe's over a roof collapse, and the rampant scourge of unconstitutional policing, by which they mean aggressive parking enforcement. Westfield is 86% white. One activity all locals recognized as treacherous, though, is trying to buy a house. "There's a lot of money and a lot of ego," one resident said. "I've seen bidding wars where friends lost by $300,000. The Broadus' house was on the boulevard, a wide, tree-lined street with some of the more desirable homes in town. As the watcher had noted, the boulevard used to be the street to live on. You'd made it if you lived on the boulevard. Built in 1905, 657 Boulevard was perhaps the grandest home on the block, and when the Woodses put it on the market, they had received multiple offers above their asking price. That led the Broaduses to initially suspect that the watcher might be someone upset over losing out on the house. But the Woodses said one interested buyer had backed out after a bad medical diagnosis, while another had already found a different home. In an email to the Broaduses, Andrea Woods proposed another theory. Would the mention of the contractor trucks and your children suggest that it was someone in the neighborhood? The letters did indicate proximity. They had been processed in Kearney, the U.S. Postal Service's distribution center in northern New Jersey. The first was postmarked on June 4th before the sale was public. The Woods had never put up a for sale sign. And June 4th was only one day after the contractors had arrived. The renovations were mostly interior, and people who lived nearby say they didn't notice an unusual commotion, even from the jackhammering in the basement. When Derek and Maria walked Detective Lugo around the house, they showed him that the easel on the porch was hidden from the street by vegetation, making it difficult to see unless someone was behind the house or right next door. A few days after the first letter, Maria and Derek went to a barbecue across the street, welcoming them and another new homeowner to the block. The Broadduses hadn't told anyone about the Watcher, as the police had instructed, and found themselves scanning the party for clues while keeping tabs on their kids, who ran guilelessly through a crowd that made up much of the suspect pool. "We kept screaming at them to stay close," Maria said. "People must have thought we were crazy." At one point, Derek was chatting with John Schmidt, who lived 2 doors down, when Schmidt told him about the Langfords, who lived in between them. Peggy Langford was in her 90s, and several of her adult children, all in their 60s, lived with her. The family was a bit odd, Schmidt said, but harmless. He described one of the younger Langfords, Michael, who didn't work and had a beard like Ernest Hemingway, as a kind of, quote, Boo Radley character, unquote. Boo Radley being the mysterious and, apparently at least to children, terrifying recluse from Harper Lee's seminal work To Kill a Mockingbird. Derek thought the case was solved. The Langford house was right next to the easel on the porch. The family had lived there since the 1960s, when the Watcher's father, the letters said, had begun observing 657 Boulevard. Richard Langford, the family patriarch, had died 12 years earlier, and the current Watcher claimed to have been on the job for the better part of 2 decades. When the Broadduses told Lugo about the family, he said he already knew, and a week after the first letter arrived, he brought Michael Langford into the police headquarters for an interview. Michael Langford denied knowing anything about the letters, but the Broadduses say that Lugo told them that the narrative of what Michael said matched things in the letters. "This isn't CSI Westfield," Officer Lugo later told the Broadduses. "When the wife is dead, it's the husband." But there wasn't much hard evidence, and after a few weeks, the police chief told the Broadduses that short of an admission, there wasn't much the department could do. "This is someone who threatened my kids, and the police are saying, probably nothing's gonna happen," said Derek Broaddus. "Probably isn't good enough for me." After the second letter, Derek told the cops that if they didn't take care of the situation, they would have a different kind of case on their hands. "This person attacked my family, and where I'm from, if you do that, you get your ass beat." Frustrated, the Broadduses began their own investigation. Derek became especially obsessed. He set up webcams in 657 Boulevard and spent nights crouched in the dark, watching to see if anyone was watching the house at close range. "Maria thought I was crazy," he said. Derek had maps showing when each of 657's neighbors had moved in, and the Langfords were the only ones there since the 1960s. The maps had overlays marking possible sight lines for the easel and a circle for approximate range of earshot to estimate who might have heard Maria yelling their kids' names. Only a few homes fit both criteria. The Broadduses also turned to several experts. They employed a private investigator who staked out the neighborhood and ran background checks on the Langfords, but didn't find anything noteworthy. Derek reached out to a former FBI agent who served as the inspiration for Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs. They were high school board of trustees together. And they also hired Robert Lanahan, another former FBI agent, to conduct a threat assessment. Lanahan recognized several old-fashioned ticks in the letters that pointed to an older writer. The envelope was addressed to M/M Braddis. The salutations included the day's weather, warm and humid, sunny and cool for a summer day, and the sentences had double spaces between them. The letters had a certain literary panache which suggested a voracious reader, and a surprising lack of profanity given the level of anger, which Lanahan thought meant a less macho writer. Maybe, he wondered, the Watcher had seen The Watcher, a movie starring Keanu Reeves as a serial killer who stalks the detective trying to catch him. Lanahan didn't think the Watcher was likely to act on the threats, but the letters had enough typos and errors to imply a certain erraticism. The first letter was dated Tuesday, June 4th, but the day was actually a Wednesday. There was also a seething anger directed at the wealthy in particular. The Watcher was upset by new money moving into town. Quote, "Are you one of those Hoboken transplants who are ruining Westfield?" Unquote, and by the Broadduses' relatively modest renovations, writing, "The house is crying from all the pain it's going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past and what it used to be in the time when I roamed its halls. The 60s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from one room to another, imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father. But he kept watching until the day he died, and now I watch, and I wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again. Lanahan recommended looking into former housekeepers, or their descendants. Perhaps the watcher was jealous that the Broadduses had bought a home that the writer could not afford. But the focus remained on the Langfords. In cooperation with the Westfield police, the Broadduses sent a letter to the Langfords announcing plans to tear down the house, hoping to prompt a response. And if you'd like to find out just what that response was, then I'd ask you to please join me this Thursday, March 16th, for Part 2 of The Watcher, 657 Broadway. Now hold on, don't turn the show off. Before I let you go, I'd like to remind you, as I nearly always do, but I was remiss in our last episode, about the free 3-digit lifeline number 988. That's 988. You can call it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to receive immediate counseling for substance use, mental health, or suicidal thoughts. So if you find yourself in crisis, please call 988. Program it into your phone now. Please do not try to be tough and go it alone. Call 988. Get the help that you need. Please do remember, always remember, that the world is a better place with you in it. Now, if you're not in crisis, but you'd just like to connect with someone, please do feel free to reach out to me, kindofmurdery@gmail.com, @kindofmurdery on all social media. I'm here, I care, and I would love to connect with you. Now, I'm not qualified, though, to assist you if you're in a truly, truly difficult place. In that case, please do call 988. But again, please do always remember that you are loved and the world is a better place with you in it. I know I just said that, but it seems it bears repeating. Also, as you know, I have cerebral palsy, and if you have a disability and would like to share some of the unique challenges that you face living with that disability, or if you just have a life that you feel like is somehow really different than what most people go through, and the truth is, all of our lives are pretty unique, please feel free to reach out to the show, kindofmurdery@gmail.com, @kindofmurdery on all social media, and share your unique story with me so that I can share it with the audience, because as you know, I believe that when we hear each other's stories, we all come to understand just a little bit better how human everybody is, and that is a way that we can all build more empathy and understanding for each other, which is something that we desperately need. And of course, please do call 888-MURDERY and tell me your kind of murdery story so that you can inspire a future episode of Kind of Murdery. Once again, thank you so much for being here. This has been part 1 of The Watcher, 657 Broadway. Looking forward to part 2 this coming Thursday. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kind of Murdery.